Why don't immigrants just get in line like everyone else? You've probably heard this phrase on social media, at family dinners, maybe even in the comments below. It sounds simple. There's a legal way to come to America, so just follow it. But is there really a line? Or is that idea more myth than reality? Spoiler alert, for millions of people, there's no line at all. And for those who find a path, it's more like a maze with locked doors. By the end of this video, you'll see why the immigration system isn't as straightforward as it seems, how undocumented workers boost our economy, and why mass deportations, especially of moms, dads, and spouses of U.S. citizens, cause more harm than good. Plus, we'll talk about what a real solution could look like, so let's break it down. First, let's talk about who can get in line. The U.S. does have legal immigration pathways, but they're mostly for specific groups, people with close family in the U.S., or those with specialized skills and a job offer. If you're related to a U.S. citizen, like a spouse, parent, or child under 21, you can apply for a family-based green card. These are called immediate relative visas, and there's no annual cap, so about 250,000 people get these every year. For example, if you marry a U.S. citizen, your spouse can file a petition for you, and after paperwork, interviews, and background checks, you might get a green card. Sounds like a line, right? But it's not that simple for everyone, and we'll get to that later. There are also green cards for more distant relatives, like siblings or adult children of citizens, but these have strict caps, so the wait can be 5, 10, even 20 years, especially if you're from countries like Mexico or India. In 2022, family-based green cards made up about 63% of the 1 million green cards issued. Then there's the employment route. If you've got a unique skill, like you're a top scientist, a tech genius, an artist with extraordinary ability, or a very specific soft porn model, you might qualify for an employment-based green card. These are categories like EB1 or EB2, and they go to about 180,000 people a year. But for unskilled workers, like farm workers or cleaners, there's a smaller category called EB3, other workers. This is capped at just 10,000 visas a year, and only about 8,000 were issued in 2022. Plus, you need a U.S. employer to sponsor you, prove no American can do the job, and navigate a ton of red tape. For most low-skill workers, finding that sponsor is like winning the lottery. Except the actual lottery visa is a different story, and we'll talk about that soon. So yeah, there's a process if you've got family or skills and a sponsor. About 1 million people become legal permanent residents each year, mostly through these family or job-based paths. But what if you don't have a U.S. citizen relative or a fancy degree? What if you're just a regular person trying to work and build a life? That's where the line starts to disappear. Here's the hard truth. Unless you fit those family or skilled worker categories, there's no real line to get in. There are a few exceptions, but they usually require something awful to have happened to you. Let's go through them. If you're fleeing persecution because of your race, religion, political beliefs, or something similar, you can apply for asylum if you're already in the U.S. or refugee status if you're abroad. In 2022, about 25,000 refugees were admitted, and 36,000 people got asylum. These are lifelines for people escaping danger, but you have to prove you're being targeted, and the process is grueling. Background checks, interviews, sometimes years of waiting. Plus, economic hardship, like poverty, doesn't qualify. So, if you're just trying to escape a tough economy, this isn't an option. Then there's the U visa for victims of certain crimes, like domestic violence or trafficking, who help law enforcement. About 10,000 of these are issued each year, but there's a huge backlog, with over 300,000 people waiting. Similarly, the T visa is for human trafficking victims, but fewer than 1,000 get it annually, because the criteria are so strict. These are critical protections, but notice the pattern. You have to have been through something traumatic. If you're an ordinary worker with no U.S. family or specialized skills, these paths don't apply. The system isn't built for you. If you're an ordinary worker with no U.S. family or specialized skills, these paths don't apply. The system isn't built for you. Let's talk about temporary work visas, specifically the H-2A for agricultural workers. These are for seasonal jobs like picking fruit or planting crops, and they're a big deal. Nearly 300,000 were issued in 2022. H-2A visas let workers come legally for up to a year, sometimes extendable to 3 years, but they're temporary. You go back home when the job's done. Converting an H-2A to a permanent green card is incredibly rare. Less than 1% of workers, maybe 3,000 a year, manage it. To do that, you'd need an employer to sponsor you for a permanent job through something like the EB-3 category. But most farm jobs are seasonal, not permanent, so employers rarely bother. The process is also expensive and complex, and backlogs for EB-3 can stretch over a decade, especially for countries like Mexico, where most H-2A workers come from. There's also the H-2B visa for non-agricultural seasonal work, like landscaping or hospitality, capped at $66,000 a year. Like H-2A, it's temporary and almost never leads to a green card. So while these visas help workers earn a living, they're not aligned to permanent residency. They're more like a revolving door. Now, what about the diversity visa lottery? This is one of the few options for people without family or skills. It's open to folks from countries with low U.S. immigration rates, and you need a high school education or a couple years of work experience. Up to 55,000 visas are available each year, but only about 24,000 were issued in 2022 due to processing issues. Here's the catch. Millions apply, anywhere from 9.5 to 22 million people a year. That means your chance of winning is tiny, between 0.24% and 0.47%. To put that in perspective, you're more likely to get struck by lightning than to win a diversity visa. It's not a line, it's a raffle with brutal odds, and if you're from a high immigration country, like Mexico or India, you're not even eligible. There are other niche visas, like for religious workers or special immigrants, but they're small, with maybe a few thousand issued yearly, and most people don't qualify. So for the average person dreaming of America, the legal options are either non-existent or a long shot. Now, let's shift gears and talk about undocumented workers. You might be thinking, if there's no line, why don't they just stay home? But here's something that doesn't get enough airtime. Undocumented workers are a massive boost to the U.S. economy. There are about 11 million undocumented immigrants in the U.S., and they contribute billions every year. Studies, like one from the Center for Immigration Studies, show they add about $79 billion in economic activity annually. They pay taxes, $27 billion in federal and state taxes, including $7 billion to Social Security and Medicare, which they can't even access. They work in critical industries. 70% of farm workers, 25% of construction workers, and 15% of restaurant staff are undocumented. Without them, food prices would skyrocket, construction would stall, and businesses would struggle. For example, in agriculture, undocumented workers help keep grocery costs low by harvesting crops that Americans rely on. They're also consumers, spending their wages on rent, groceries, and goods, which creates jobs. The idea that they're a drain is a myth. Economists agree they're a net positive, especially in states like California and Texas. Undocumented workers aren't just filling gaps. They're driving growth.